years old when she was murdered on October 7th of 1992 in Sunderland, England. She had 3 sisters, and she was described as a very bright and bubbly girl. A girl who was just always happy. She had a particular love for cheese and onion crisps, which in the US and Canada you would call potato chips. And that's kind of, it seems like an insignificant detail, but it's kind of important for later on in the case. She would always take them with her to school in her lunch pack. Now, her parents were divorced, and she lived with her mother, Sharon, in an apartment in the same block as her grandparents. The apartments were only like 140 meters away from each other. So, like, from what I can tell, because it's a little bit important to know, like, where she was, but they're not apartments that you access indoors. Like, the doors are on the outside, from what I could tell, so you'd have to walk in, like, an outdoor hallway, and they were on different floors. She would have had to go, I think the grandparents lived a floor up, so they're not, like, 140 meters is a matter of a couple of doors away from each other, but they were on a different floor. So on the evening of October 7th of 1992, Nikki was at home playing with her older sister and her cousin, and her mother left them alone for a few minutes to pop over to her father and stepmother's apartment, which, like I said, was in the same building. Shortly after, she was followed by Nikki and her cousin. She asked her mom if they could go to the park tomorrow, and was like, you know, just wanted to hang around her mom. And her mom said, look, go home. I'll only be a few minutes and then I'll be home too. And it wasn't, and like, it was only 10 minutes later that Sharon went home. So she checked up on the girls and found that Nikki wasn't there. And Nikki's sisters told her mom that Nikki hadn't come home. So Sharon immediately went back to her parents, and they went out and searched for Nikki for about half an hour. And then Sharon just knew that something was wrong, and she alerted the police. Now, they were fortunate enough to live in a very tight-knit community, so the news of Nikki's disappearance spread very fast, and a search party involving hundreds of people was quickly set up. Unfortunately, the next morning, Nikki's body was found in a building called the Quayside Exchange Building, and it was one of those abandoned, very old buildings with, you know, like broken windows and missing doors. And the building was only a couple of yards from the apartment building. So a search party led by her aunt spotted Nikki's shoes outside the building. She was wearing bright red shoes, so you could very easily tell that they were hers. And then when they went inside the building, they found her body. She had been badly beaten with a brick and stabbed 37 times. Police started questioning neighbors and any potential witnesses to see if anyone had seen Nikki. But there is a little bit of a discrepancy in statements, because some people said that she left the apartment at 7:30 and others say 9:30. And I read an article with a timeline that said 8:30, but a witness potentially saw her as late as 10 p.m. And since they searched for her for half an hour, my guess is that she left at 9:30. If it had been 8:30 and someone saw her at 10, given that the search party and everything was set up, I think they would have found her. She was spotted outside of a pub, which was across the street from the apartments. Now, some witnesses also said that they heard a little girl screaming coming from the direction of the Quayside Exchange Building. Witnesses also said that they saw her skipping past the pub on her way to the docks alone. And then other witnesses later on saw her with a man. He was walking alongside the river wearing a white dress shirt, and Nikki was skipping along behind him. There is CCTV footage that also picked them up. So I did pick both of them up. The video is very unclear, but you can see a man in a white shirt and a child behind him skipping. So, since witnesses saw them, I think you can assume that it is them. It's interesting because she's 7, so it could be that she has no fear of people and just trusts everyone. But the fact that she is just like happily skipping behind a man, I think indicates one of two things. He either wasn't aware that she was behind him and she wasn't following him, they just happened to be in close proximity of each other, or she knew him. A lot of people believe that man to be a stranger to her, but again, she could have just been a very trusting girl. But I find it a bit weird that when you're skipping, which is a sign of happiness, that you are following someone that you don't know. I don't know. That's just me thinking that. During interviews with the neighbors, they kept mentioning the name of a man known as the local weirdo, and his name is George Heron. Now, he frequented the Quayside Exchange building a lot. No one knows why, but he went into that building a lot. And he lived in the same block of apartments with his sister. And he was seen by witnesses in the pub that night buying a packet of cheese and onion potato chips. That in itself, I don't think means much, okay? It is a big coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidences, but I also love cheese and onion. Like, if I were to buy a packet of crisps or potato chips in a pub, I would go for that flavor. So I don't want to necessarily say that that's, that ties him to her murder, but a lot of people do believe that he used that to lure her into following him. Police arrested him and questioned him, but despite multiple witnesses seeing him in the pub that night, he claims that he was not there that night, and he denied knowing Nikki 120 times during his interview. According to George's sister, on the night that Nikki was murdered, he came home and went straight upstairs and washed himself and his clothes for half an hour. And this then led to police conducting a search of George's apartment. They found some of his clothes and shoes with blood spatters on them. After 3 days of questioning, he confessed to Nikki's murder. But it did take 2 years for the case to go to trial, which is not that out of the ordinary. I think most, there are some that take a lot longer, but I think in general, most cases take about 2 years to go to trial. However, they sent the trial to Leeds Court. Leeds is a city that was like 100 miles away because they wanted to ensure that he got a fair trial if there was local jury members and a local judge. Given that it was a tight-knit community and they all knew Nikki, it might cloud their judgment. So, again, despite witness statements putting him near Nikki at the time of her murder, buying the crisps, and finding the clothing with blood spatter, police also believed they found the murder weapon at his house, and he also confessed. The judge berated police for the way they handled the investigation. The judge said that he listened to all the interview tapes and deemed, I think there were 12, and he deemed 7 of them inadmissible, including the one with George's confession. He felt like police misrepresented the evidence to George, and that the police coerced George into confessing to the crime. He said that 3 days of non-stop 24/7 questioning is brutal on anyone, and it's happened more in the past that people give a false confession just so they can be done with it. And he said that the evidence they presented was all presented in the direction of him having done it, like almost as if they were able to tie it to him when in fact they weren't. And during his interview, there was a legal secretary present, but there was no qualified lawyer present. And he also said that the blood spatter and murder weapon were all circumstantial evidence. DNA testing wasn't advanced in that time, so they couldn't rule that the blood on his clothes was from Nikki. They also couldn't take DNA from Nikki's body because they didn't have the means to rule out other people that she had come in contact with. It just wasn't, the technology wasn't there. So all of this, because they didn't have the DNA testing, police relied heavily on witnesses, and there also appeared to be a problem with the witness statements. Most importantly, that all witnesses described a different looking man. So all witnesses said that they saw him and that, he looked like the man that they saw walking down the street, all that stuff. But they ultimately all described someone different, and none of them were able to identify George in a lineup. So eventually the judge acquitted George of the murder. A number of jury members sent a letter to Sharon saying that they strongly believed George was guilty, but George was given a new identity and moved away. In 1994, Nikki's mom, Sharon, brought a civil case against George Heron, charging him with battery of a child resulting in her death. Now, a court actually found in her favor and ordered George to pay a sum of £7,000. I mean, £7,000 is insulting, right? For your child's death. I find that such a low amount, but I also find it so bizarre because they didn't convict him of the murder. But then a year later, they kind of did, because they found, a battery of a child resulting in her death essentially means that he killed her, and the court found him guilty of that, but acquitted him of murder. Yes, different judge, but still, so bizarre. Given the fact that no one could trace George, she never saw a penny of that money, but I don't think she needed it. I think she just wanted some form of justice. In 2013, Nikki's case was featured on Crime Watch, and this brought new life into it. As a result of this, in 2014, police arrested a man named Stephen Grieveson, who was known as the Sunderland Strangler. He was a serial killer who was already serving 3 life sentences at this time for strangling 3 teenage boys in the years kind of around when Nikki disappeared, or when Nikki was murdered, sorry. They did end up dropping their investigation into him. In 2016, Sharon called for a full reinvestigation of the crime. She launched an online petition urging police to carry out a top-to-bottom review of the case, which attracted more than 500 signatures in less than 24 hours. She also wrote to Stephen Grieveson, urging him to share anything he may know about Nikki's death. So interestingly, she believes that George killed her daughter because she filed a suit against him, but now she believes that Stephen killed her daughter. I'm not sure. In 2017, she met with the police chief constable and the detective chief inspector to discuss the case, and they restate their determination to bring Nikki's killer to justice. But that is all that has happened in this case. It still hasn't been solved. I do find it a little strange that with DNA testing being as good as it is now, and a lot of cold cases being solved now by DNA testing, why police haven't redone that. I couldn't find anything on them testing the DNA again from George's clothes. I believe that they can't retry George. I think once you've been acquitted of a crime, you can't be convicted of it later. But at least if they were to find that the blood on his shoes and all that was from Nikki, her mom would at least have an answer as to who did it. I just don't know, why they're not doing that. But that's all there is in this case, so I will wrap it up here. Thank you as always so much for watching, and I will see you